Oh, dear mama, this documentary, if you thought you knew Tupac and if you thought you understood the Black Panther movement, you need to watch this. It's, of course, on my what to watch list. And joining me is one of the executive producers of Dear Mama, which I finished, and it's amazing. He's also a legend. So I can't believe this is the first time he's on, but it's my oversight because this man has been on a journey and in many ways parallel, but then so much more ascended in this space with the books and the documentaries and all of the ways in which he's moving the needle. Emmy Award winning The Chris Rock Show on HBO, Hip Hop Honors, and the executive producer of American Gangster, the crime series as well. Let me welcome the great Nelson George.
Hey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, we're celebrating 50 years of hip hop this year. And
Yeah.
and I think about your career, my career, Kevin Powell, Daniel Smith, there's like the Source magazine and all of the ways in which our culture has shifted and changed the entire world. And the writers, this is where we, cut our teeth, right? We cut our teeth on this thing.
Well, hip hop is a foundational art form because unlike jazz and R&B and soul music and even funk that came before it, it had an ability to expand outside of music, so that I can tell you my career has been directly influenced, my post-writing career, from doing CB4 with Chris Rock in '93, a comedy about hip hop. I did a film with Queen Latifah called Life Support for HBO. It was ostensibly about HIV, but the fact is that I knew Queen Latifah and her manager Shakim from the hip hop world, and that helped me make that film happen. The Get Down series
Mm.
on Netflix that I was a producer and writer on, uh, they hired me because I'd been there and they wanted someone who had that long history. So I can go on and on throughout my sort of post-writing career to where hip hop, the expansive quality of hip hop, and the fact that it created so many stars, and the fact that it created so much culture that's it's not just music, but fashion, dance, slang, so forth. Made it possible for me to expand outside of just being a journalist.
Yeah. What I liked about this particular film, unlike some of the others, which to me, we watch hip hop people go to stardom, have record labels, clothing lines, and all of this. But when I watched Dear Mama, Tupac's commitment to us, to our liberation, to honoring a very complicated relationship with his own mother, which so many people have anyway, mothers who aren't Black Panthers, who aren't addicted, and how he in his teens and early 20s had a sense of self and maturity that to this day there's a scene where he's talking about girls and
Ah,
how women, he's approaching them and, hi, how are you look nice, you're beautiful, and he's not getting any reaction and he's watching the other guys. And I was thinking about which came first, the chicken or the egg, like how we now to this day socialize as men and women, Black men and women in particular. I go back to what Tupac, and it was like, how many brothers who were on that path turned into dogs because of the reaction that they got? Or, like, what do you remember this scene? I know you
oh, very
do.
well. He's 17 years old. He's being interviewed as part of a program with interviewing a lot of students at that high school in Marin, a very rich high school, by the way. And he's talking about the fact that he can't get any love for any women because he's not masculine enough. And that's something that any bookish, I went through that as well, any bookish guy goes through, where you're kind of taught by your mother to be respectful, but there's a certain kind of swagger, a certain kind of attitude that women are drawn to. And people blame guys, but a lot of that is their reaction to their environment. There's a lot to be said about that, I'm sure, on the women's side, but certainly there's a certain kind of sense of feeling safe or protected that sometimes women must feel from these other guys. And so Pac, went through a transition. And it's really great is that we were able to interview two different of his best friends from high school who both talk about that transition in great detail and how he evolved. I think the thing about Tupac that's important to note is that to say you know Tupac is to say you know a chameleon. You say you know an actor. There's various parts of his life where he transformed. And he did this many, many times between 15 and 25. I think I met Tupac about 4 times in my life. And I would say every time I met him, he was a different person because I met him at different points of his journey. The guy I met the first time was at some music conference when he's probably just very young. He's got glasses on, and I'm on some panel, and he introduced himself. He's very polite and very kind of, because he was a some because he was a musical, he was a Shakespearean musical comedy kid who read poetry and read Shakespeare and stuff. And then I encountered him again, and he was on his way to being a star, and he was totally like, energized and draped in gold, and that around the time of Poetic Justice. And then the last time I saw him was in the last year of his life, at a post-party MTV party in New York, and he was that crazy, energized and somewhat dangerous dude. And that's only within, what is that? That's 4 years maybe. I think most people see Tupac, a lot of the general public see him as the last 18 months of his life.
Mm-hmm.
I found something interesting. I just want to read you real quick. I found his obituary in the New York Times. And the headline of his obituary in the New York Times was "Rap Artist Who Personified Violence." Okay.
That was the headline?
That was the headline of his obituary in the New York Times. So much about him. And I think what the challenge and what the real success of Dear Mama is that 18 months is not the totality of what in fact, it's only a part of his journey. One reason I got involved, I've known Alan Hughes, I've known Alan Hughes since 1990.
Look at him squinting, trying to go back.
He was
trying to go back.
He was in college, and I'll never forget it. Tamara Davis, who did a lot of early music videos, in fact, she directed CB4, said her brother was going to school with these 2 twin brothers. And she sent me a couple of their student films. And I got to tell you, I mean, I've seen a lot of like student films. You could see from how they shot it, how they use the sound design, that these guys were at a next level. And this is like they're, 18, 19. And we became friends. And it's funny, it's the first time we worked together. But Alan has a really great perspective because his mother was an activist. His mother had been very active in the women's liberation movement and of the 70s, 80s. And so when we started working on it, we learned that the mother was the story. And quite honestly, for me, she's way more interesting than Tupac.
Oh my goodness. And that comes through. And you're talking about the Hughes brothers, Alan in particular, Alan and Albert, Dead Presidents, Menace to Society, Book of Eli, which is my favorite. His auntie, his mother, somebody asked, I asked this question, what would Tupac have been had he lived, right? He was 25. And just put that in perspective. He was 25 when he was taken. And as you mentioned, you saw 3 versions of himself. I mean, he had morphed into 3 different people by the age of 25. Imagine him today. I think if he's alive today, Jay-Z's not huge. There's no room. There's no room.
Jay-Z, Will Smith might not be a movie star.
Will Smith might not be married to Jada Pinkett.
Well, that's interesting. But I put it this way. I don't want to go there. But Tupac's a movie star.
Yes, he is.
And if he'd been able to get through that patch and get away from death row and go into the next evolution, he had screenplays he'd written. He wanted to open a restaurant. That was one of the things that came up in our research. And we saw he'd written out a whole menu. So he would have evolved as many people in hip hop have evolved. He still would have made records probably into his 30s. And maybe, but I'm sure the boy would have, I mean, he would have written books. He was a natural prose writer. He would have expanded, and that was really his goal. So one of the funny things about this process is, I'm in my 60s now, Alan's in his 50s. And we're looking back now on an era when we were young men. And we see how far we've evolved from that time, from 96. And imagine how many evolutions this brother would have went through if he'd survived.
Mm. Mm. I think about that, Nelson George, quite frequently. I don't ever want to go back to being in my 20s. So much, it's so much better at this age. But
it's
you have
better
to go
later.
through. It is, and people don't even appreciate, that everyone's trying to be younger. No, this is a great time to be because you know so much.
What did Bevy Smith say? It gets later, greater. It gets greater later. Yeah. That's right.
Yes, and Bevy is the diva, the queen on Sirius XM. I love her. That said, for you, having watched all of this, having watched so much destruction and decimation, the East Coast, West Coast fabricated beef that cost the lives of so many, all of the incarceration, all of the vilification. You reading that headline in the New York Times, demonizing a whole group of people, and as Tupac would say, we don't have planes. We're not bringing the drugs in. We don't have gas. We don't have what do you say? Bulletproof vests. The police are coming in. We don't have tasers. We don't have any of the things to protect ourselves. Y'all coming in. You got backup. We don't have backup, and you want to demonize us. He was on the precipice, and I feel like in many ways the Fred Hampton, that comparison. I don't know if there was some funny stuff going on with him not being here, because he was also poking his finger in the eye of oppression.
Well, one thing I would say when you bring up his ability to articulate and debate, go back. I forget which episode we got into it, but there's a whole episode. I think it's maybe episode 2 or 3 where we talk about how Faney would punish him by making him read the New York Times, and then punish him further by making him debate or have to argue a point. And so when you see this guy at 17, at 19, at 21, she had trained him to think in an analytical way, trained him to think in a way where he could articulate and counter bogus arguments. And all of that is layered in with the knowledge of being around the Panthers. And that, so you have a guy, one of the only people of the hip hop generation, quite honestly, who was, because he was steeped in the Panthers, steeped in the ideas of and also he wasn't, his mother is very articulate and very clear. She's not a Black nationalist. She is she's a champion of oppression. She doesn't care about, that's why she named him Tupac Shakur. So I think there's a misnomer that people think that Pac and his mother and the Black Panthers were like black. No, they were anti-capitalist. They were Marxist. And I think one of the biggest, there's 2 achievements of the film that I'm very proud of. One is that we're defining the Panthers in a way that's much more nuanced than I think a lot of people understand them. And 2, people think about the Panthers, they think about the Oakland Panthers. They think about Bobby Seale and Eldridge and Huey Newton. There were many chapter of the Panthers. The Chicago chapter was Fred Hampton. The New York chapter was very specific. They were also much more cultural nationalists. Now, what that means is that they were much more Afrocentric in their thinking than, let's say, the Oakland Panthers. And that's an important story point, especially in episode 3. So what I think we achieve in the film is not just simply a biography of Tupac or even a biography of Afeni. We're also, using Tupac and to put Black radical thought and Black radical ideology in the minds of 21st century people in a way that they never would have gone if it was just a Black Panther doc. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, you delivered that for sure. We're talking with Nelson George, the great Nelson George. I don't even want to limit you to author and producer and all of that. You just you're a generation's propeller on so many levels. You did one of your first books was on Michael Jackson, and you have
I think it's
another
my
Michael.
first book, actually.
It was your very first book.
Yes.
Okay. Man, you have another Michael Jackson project coming out?
Yeah, the estate had me do I did a 40th anniversary documentary on the making of Thriller. That'll be out toward the end of the year.
Okay. I want to play this Michael Jackson clip that I've been holding on to. I was gonna play it yesterday and I didn't have time because I feel some ways about the estate right now. So maybe you can talk about, maybe not. Unfortunately, Piers Morgan is in this clip, so y'all just can't ignore. Sometimes you got to chew up the meat to spit out the bones to get to the goodness. So we're gonna say that there's trash in this clip. Piers Morgan is in it, but what is being said is so pertinent to where we are today. Can you play it, Smith?
About a plan to buy Marvel, the comic business, back in 2001 or 2, I think it was. Let's listen to this.
We could easily go into Universal and buy. We would own Jaws, E.T., Close Encounters, all the classics from Universal. Own all of that stuff that will allow us to do a channel, part of the Marvel channel. Not only the Marvel characters, but Marvel films, like the catalog. We could do anything we want, from restaurants to retail, theme park.
Now, you actually got the financing in place, I believe, for this deal. Then came the scandal court cases, and it all got put on the back burner. Disney ended up buying Marvel and doing exactly what Michael had predicted and making a fortune at it.
From the Beatles catalog to this, to purchasing Sony, one would argue, Nelson George, that when folk dream big and then have the means to execute, sometimes they end up not being here anymore.
Well, I mean, Michael Jackson, from what I've seen in all the conversations I've had, was a big visionary thinker. He thought globally. He thought was great forethought in terms of, because he was someone who understood pop culture. And when you watch his videos, you see the ability to synthesize various traditions. One of the things that's really going to be interesting about the doc is that we went into great detail about his dancing and his performance style. And I think that when you look at literally what he did from moment to moment on the Motown 25, when you look at the references in the Thriller video, when you look at the references in Beat It, he's taking from street dance, he's taking from contemporary modern dance. He can unite Fred Astaire and Crazy Legs. And so he had a big vision. I think one of the things that really, that I saw in his, because we use a lot of his writings in the film, not quite as extensively as in the Tupac thing, but Michael also kept affirmations that he wrote almost on a daily basis. And this is something actually, quite honestly, that I didn't know, and I feel like that I wish I had known when I was younger, because I think I would have written about him differently, is his connection to Blackness and Black identity, and how much that motivated him. That the idea of world, even though he was a globalist in the best sense of the word, he had a very strong sense, and he knew the history of Black oppression. He knew the history of Black exploitation in the music and entertainment business. He was a much more complex than I think that, and like almost every public figure. I think almost every public figure is more complex than they're given, because people tend to decide that these 5 crates are what they are. And that's never who anybody is.
I'm thinking some people we give more texture than they actually have as well. 2 things could be true. That said, as Michael Jackson, when he says we, I know he's talking about us. And I think people don't explore the fact that Jermaine, who's in the Nation of Islam, like they are, I did Janet's book. She picked me over all of the people she could have picked. It was intentional, like their whole family, they understand what this is. And I feel like the fact that he's not here is on purpose. But Nelson George, when the Michael Jackson doc comes back out, or anytime, you can just come on back, sir. I don't even know why it took so long.
Well, actually, I just want to mention one more thing since we're
Yes.
among my other projects, I executive produced a project called Flower with Misty Copeland. It's going to premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival. It's a half-hour, I would say, dance advocacy project. We use contemporary dance, the kind of stuff that Misty does. We use street dance. We use turfing, which is a Bay Area dance style, to talk about homelessness. So we shot in Oakland during the pandemic. It's shot on the streets of Oakland. And it's a very special project trying to use the tools of dance to shine a light on a global and especially a national problem of homelessness. So Flower, it premieres June 8th at the Tribeca Film Festival. It's going to play multiple times there. We'd love for people to try and check it out.